Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name's Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh.
I feel so good because
I'm so excited.
it's a David Fincher movie. We haven't had one for like 6 years. The first year we started doing this podcast, we talked about Gone Girl. And we've talked about other movies. Even this year we talked about Fight Club. But having new David Fincher is so exciting to me. So we're going to talk about his newest movie that came out on Netflix over the weekend, and it's called Mank. And it's about Herman Mankiewicz, a playwright, screenwriter, gambler, and functioning alcoholic who's coming off being fired by a studio, barely surviving a car crash with a broken leg. And he's contacted by Orson Welles to write a screenplay that became Citizen Kane. So the film cuts between the process of writing the screenplay in 1940 and Mank's experiences in the 1930s Hollywood and his interactions with William Randolph Hearst and his much younger companion, Marion Davies, which many viewers see as the inspiration for Charles Foster Kane and Susan Alexander in Orson Welles' film. I want to talk about the beginnings of this film because it's unique as far as David Fincher is concerned because it was written by his dad, which I thought was kind of crazy. So his father, Jack Fincher, was a journalist. He was the San Francisco bureau chief of Life magazine back in the day, like in the 70s. And he ended up writing this screenplay in the 1990s, kind of finished it in the 1990s. And David Fincher's been trying to get it made over the last 30 years. So that's interesting right off the bat. And just the fact that like him working with his dad or going back and forth with his dad passed away in 2003, so he didn't get to see this come to fruition, but it definitely adds another layer of complexity to this whole story.
I love that he finally had a chance to tell the story that his father has had a screenplay of for 30 years. And I think it's the best thing about this movie, the screenplay.
Yes, I agree.
And that's really not setting the bar low. It's setting it really high. And I think everything rises to that level of this film. Because spoiler alert, I loved this movie.
Me too.
Loved it. I think it's brilliant. I'm captivated by it. I'm thrilled by it. It lit me up. So that said, I think it's great because in the end, I think it's going to win his father an Oscar.
Wow.
And I think it's going to be really, I do.
That's cool.
I have a really crazy prediction at the end of the podcast about the Oscars. But I just feel like how I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it. It's not even my dad or not even my screenplay. I'm not David Fincher or anything, but I don't even know the word. How much will it mean to him I'm sure David Fincher will accept the Oscar if and when his father wins. How much will that mean to him? I can't even fathom it. I think that his father has done him proud. The screenplay is witty and sharp. I think it's witty and clever without being condescending or talking down to you. It's not pretentious on any level. And I think that's really hard to do when you're talking about one of the biggest and best movies of all time, meaning Citizen Kane, and personalities like Mank and Orson Welles and the characters in the movie and Hearst, and all of these characters are larger than life. Mayer, Louis B. Mayer, all of these characters, and it's hard to contain them, and he does it so well, and he makes the script about something other than just screenwriting. So I love the fact that his father wrote this and that he had a chance. And I think that his father, wherever he may be, is super proud because the movie is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like what he got out of it, what he put on the screen, it must have been inspirational for Fincher. I don't know how Fincher really thinks about things like that, but it just must have been powerful for him to be doing it.
I know that David Fincher has, capacity for emotion. And a lot of people think that, I don't know, I get the perception that people think he's some sort of automaton or something, but he makes great films, which means that he's in tune with his emotions and with the emotions of the movie-going public. So I do think that, I think that the thing that interests me, like beyond just the fact that like he's doing something, he's collaborating with his dad even post his dad's death, is the fact that his relationship with his dad as far as his filmmaking and what his dad thought about film compared to journalism. Like it seems like there was a little bit of push and pull there, and him and his dad going back and forth over revisions of the script. It seems like there were contentions there, just in the same way that he has with any other screenwriter that he's worked with. Just in watching the special features of a Social Network, just seeing him at the same table as Aaron Sorkin and them going back and forth and him being like, why would you put that there? Why is that line there? What are you talking about? This doesn't make any sense. And he's saying that to Aaron Sorkin. So he's not somebody who's, scared of pushing against someone who everyone else says is is amazing at his job. He's willing to kind of go back and be like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And he was willing to do that even with his father. And I'm sure he had reverence for his father and what his father did as a journalist and even as a potential screenwriter. But that didn't stop him from wanting to make the best film possible. And I think both Jack Fincher and David Fincher wanted to make the best film possible, and having both of them working together and collaborating up to the point where he passed away, even when they weren't able to get it made, that had to make the screenplay something that allowed Fincher to move forward with it. And I've read a bunch of articles and interviews with Fincher to the point where he said once he finally went back and looked at his dad's screenplay that last got revised in the late 1990s, he said, I don't know why I wasn't looking into this sooner. And it was obviously a confluence of events, Netflix coming back to him and saying, like, what do you want to do? As opposed to what's the next thing that we want to get made? It was one of those like pie in the sky type situations. And it's like, if you could do anything, what would you do? He's like, well, I do have this thing from 20 years ago almost that never just stuck the landing. So maybe we figure this out. And once he got back into that, and he also got Eric Roth involved, who was the screenwriter of Curious Case of Benjamin Button. He was also a screenwriter of Forrest Gump, and he's done multiple things. But so you have a competent screenwriter to kind of make another pass at that, and to have a giving take with David Fincher while they were preparing for the film more recently. So I think all those things together, even though Eric Roth didn't get credit on the screenplay, that seems to be par for the course with a lot of things. Even Herman Mankiewicz worked on screenplays and worked on things that he didn't get credit for. And in fact, in this film, you see that the contract that he signed with RKO was, it wasn't even with RKO, it was with Mercury Productions, with Orson Welles' company, was that he wasn't going to get credit anyway. And he ended up fighting for credit afterwards. So all of that coming together, there's a lot of parallels between this actual movie and the subject matter in the movie, which is also so cool. So all of that together, there's so many layers. It's like a huge cake, and we're just trying to dig through each of the layers of it.
Let me make a clarification really quick, and then we'll move on. I didn't mean to sound like I thought David Fincher was a robot. That's not my point. My point is, I don't like when people say, I think he feels this way. I have no idea how David Fincher feels. I didn't know that he had a reputation of being non-emotional or whatever. That wasn't my point. My point was to not assume another person's feelings about something so intense as this, because we've talked about this a gazillion times. Father-son relationships, 90% of all screenplays are about that. So this is literally in real life happening. I found it interesting that this is, of course, based on Citizen Kane and the making of the screenplay and not necessarily the making of the movie. And it seems like this movie obviously is paying homage to that and inspired by that, but it also directly, I won't say rip it off, but it draws directly from it, from certain scenes. I mean, there's obvious scenes in the movie that are shot just like in Citizen Kane. Mm-hmm. And unlike what Tarantino does, where Tarantino gets inspired by a genre of movie and then kind of does it his own way, this is almost a direct inspiration. It's directly related to Citizen Kane. And I thought that was fantastic. I thought it was great that he didn't stray away from that. Fincher didn't stray away from, there are a few core scenes. The Rosebud scene is directly imitated. And I thought that could have been a trapping, but I thought it was brilliant how he handled that.
I do have a quote about Fincher talking about his dad. This quote, I think, elucidates what he thinks about scripts and the script's relationship to the final film. So Fincher said, "A script is the egg, and it needs a donor to create the cellular split that moves it into the realm of something playable in 3 dimensions and recordable in 2 dimensions. And presentable to other people. For all his magazine stories about filmmakers," he's talking about his dad now, "for all his magazine stories about filmmakers, he knew the vernacular, but he didn't understand where the blueprint ends and the geological survey begins." So he is saying that, yeah, my dad was smart, my dad was good, he was good at what he did, but he wasn't a filmmaker. I'm sure he has a certain amount of reverence for his dad, but it is tempered by his ability to understand his relationship to filmmaking versus his dad's relationship to filmmaking. So I thought that that was interesting. And then the other thing that the other quote that I wanted to bring up was Fincher, just in talking about filmmaking in general, is that he says, "It is an incredibly chaotic circus. It is not cold and it is not calculable. It is a warm, wet art." And that to me, from someone like David Fincher, is really interesting, because I think that Fincher may want the art of filmmaking to be cold and calculable, but he understands that it's not. So he has to work within the chaos that is filmmaking. It's interesting that he, it's very Quixote-like, I guess, as we'll get into Don Quixote later on in the talk of this film, where he's purposefully pointing himself at odds with things as opposed to trying to do something that's very simple or very controllable. And filmmaking is inherently chaotic, and he is able to move through that even with his high standards. We look at how he makes films doing hundreds and hundreds of takes and all of that stuff, and we look at that as he's rigid, he's not fluid, and he's not able to make concessions. But ultimately, he still is making concessions. He's just maybe making less concessions than other filmmakers. But to him, he feels like he's still making a lot of concessions, and he's still working in such a messy art. But he obviously still loves it because he's still doing it. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm such a David Fincher defender. I feel like he gets a bad rap, and I'm like always there to try to defend him. But I mean, I know you don't give him a bad rap.
Who
but I'm just
cares?
trying to
If he
represent.
made bad films and had a bad rap, that would be different.
Well,
if
yeah.
he made mediocre films and he had a bad rap, that would be different.
Mhm.
He makes brilliant movies, so whatever. Who cares about what his reputation is? It does not affect me on any level. I love the fact that you've quoted David Fincher, because I didn't know any of those things. A person coming to this movie, do they need to have seen Citizen Kane in order to enjoy Mank? Will it make sense to them? And is it as valuable of a film watching experience if you have not seen Citizen Kane?
Yeah, I think that this movie has, I'm going to quote Donkey from Shrek. And this movie it's like an onion. So is it Donkey that said that, or is it Shrek that said that? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But it's like an onion. You can definitely peel back the outer layers and you understand what the thing is. You understand that it is still a fully formed thing. But as you keep peeling it out, I've seen the movie twice now, and the second time I've found so many more things than the first time. And that has a lot to do with the pace of the script. And we're not used to that pace. We've talked about it in the past. The high words per minute that are in older films, especially screwball comedies and those types of films, where there's just more words being said on screen than there are nowadays. That's just how it is. And if you're not there, if you're not on top of it, then you may not get all the references. I think that there's a superficial understanding of this film that is definitely there. It is a coherent film. But I think that there's a lower level that's even more nuanced when you know the story behind Citizen Kane, and when you know anything about William Randolph Hearst or Marion Davies or 1930s Hollywood or any of the movies that were coming out around that time, or Orson Welles. Like, if you know anything about all of those things, then you get even more about that. But then if you start digging into the politics of California in the 1930s and 1940s and the politics of the United States in the 1930s and 40s, you really start understanding a lot more about the subtext of a lot of the lines and a lot of the relationships between specifically Herman Mankiewicz and Louis B. Mayer, and Herman Mankiewicz and William Randolph Hearst. So I think that the more you know, the more you get out of the film. It's the more you put in, the more you get out. So yeah.
It's interesting that you tapped into two things that I think are very important. The first thing is that I said it was Aaron Sorkin-esque dialogue, but it has its own tone. It has its own thing. It's not as quippy, if you will. It's quippy in places, but I don't know what adjective I would use to describe Aaron Sorkin. Fast pace, of course, but it's quippy. It's like that. It's long dialogue, but they're quips, which is odd. Brilliant, but odd. I think his father, Fincher's father, I think he probably he wrote the script a long time ago, so he didn't really have an Aaron Sorkin experience to pull on. So I don't know if that was in the original script, but it does have its own tone and texture. And as for the politics that you were talking about, and I like the onion thing where there's layers and layers and layers. I think you're right. I think you can enjoy this film as just a film about Mank or what happened in Hollywood in the 30s. But at the same time, the political world that they were involved in, that is a major, I would say, subplot, but it's a major plot in this movie, really reflects a lot about what's going on in 2020. And the way that people influence other people by these words like socialism and communism and these words that they threaten people with. And when you see in the film later on, when the guy's making, I can't remember the character's name right off the bat, when he's making the film about trying to influence voters, and he's using actors, and they're basically saying the same thing that they say nowadays to instill fear, scare tactics, or influence and get people to be on their side. So I thought that was fascinating. I was like, I'm wondering if that was part of the original script or if Fincher kind of like wrote that in at the last minute based on what's been going on in this country in the last, let's say, 10 years.
Yeah.
I was going to say 4 years, but let's go back 10 years. It's an interesting thing that the same political, I don't want to say threats, but political influences still ring true. Motivation, that's a good word. It's interesting to me that if you say to somebody, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen, and you use trigger words to get them to vote.
Yeah, it can be
that's
fear-mongering.
Fascinating to me. Yeah, absolutely. Or it can be that you're just very aware of how you want people to think about a political view. And, you know, if you do feel like that's a threat, then to somebody who is making that accusation, you said fear-mongering, but they might feel that's a threat. So they don't feel like that's fear-mongering. That's just them telling you how it's going to be. But I thought it's fascinating because a lot of the things that you hear on the news today are the same trigger words that they were using in the script. And I thought, oh man, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
One of the quotes I've written down is Mank saying to Irving Thalberg, "You can convince the public King Kong is 10 stories tall and Mary Pickford is a virgin at 40, but you can't convince starving voters that a turncoat socialist is a menace to everything Californians hold dear. You're barely trying." And he's essentially saying that
you're barely trying.
You're barely
he
trying.
Says that last part is brilliant. You're barely trying.
And then he walks out.
He's walking out the door. Brilliant.
Yeah, and then he walks
Brilliant.
out. Yeah, but really what he's saying is that you have a machine of influence and you're not even using it. That's before they started making those films. And that is based on truth. They did, MGM did make reels. They made California voter reels that played before films in the 1930s. So that was historically accurate. And I think that was in Jack Fincher's original screenplay because David Fincher did talk a little bit about that, how he kind of didn't see how that fit into the story, like where that fit in the story of Herman Mankiewicz making the writing Citizen Kane, but it ultimately informs the writers. What Jack Fincher said to David Fincher was that it made Herman Mankiewicz realize that his words made a difference. His words had power. And he was reflecting that to Thalberg, saying that, like, yes, my words have power, but your filmmaking apparatus also has power or can have power. And ultimately it did because, I'm sure it wasn't the only reason that Merriam got reelected, but that's how they portray it in the film, is that it was a contributing factor to Merriam beating Upton Sinclair. The other biggest quote for me was that why do you put up with me, or why do I put up with you? And that brings in Mankiewicz's wife Sarah, or poor Sarah as a lot of people called her. But I did love the repetition as far as bringing that into the film in certain areas. And it does give the audience a pause as to, like, why did she put up with him?
I love that. That's one of the quotes that you pull out. There's just things in interpersonal relationships that only the two people understand that are in that relationship. That's just the way that it is. That's what I took that for. That's why she's understanding of his friendships with females that mean nothing but friendship, which I thought was a really interesting thing, that you never see him kind of creeping on the girls. You never see him being inappropriate. You never see him taking their relationship towards any other realm other than friendship. And she even says that, I put up with your platonic relationships. I put up with this, but this I'm not putting up with. To me, interpersonal relationships, I never judge why anybody would be with anybody else. Why would somebody be with an alcoholic who gambles away $2,400 over a flip of a coin? I mean, or a leaf falling from a tree? Who knows why people put up with that? There's probably a lot of things that we'll never understand about their relationship. So I think I like that you pointed that out, because I think it's more introspective for the person that's being put up with than the person doing the putting up.
And I think,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like he wants to know why she puts up with him, but she already knows why.
But
she loves him, and that's it. And they're interesting together.
And also, yeah, well, yeah, definitely. And also as a script device, as a storytelling device throughout the film, it's said at least 3 times, I think maybe 4 times, whether it's either him saying, "Why do you put up with me?" or her saying, "Why do I put up with you?" And from the beginning to the end of the film, you start to understand the character a little bit more. So the question has a different meaning as the film goes on. So you may start understanding why she may put up with him, as far as like how he can command a room, or how he always has a quick quip against someone, or the right thing to say, or the most cutting thing to say. That may be something that she's attracted to, or that she admires in him. But we don't know that at the beginning of the film, but we do have a better picture of him at the end of the film. And so by the end of the film, and we're not really getting into spoilers here, really, but by the end of the film, when he asks her that the last time, and she's like, "I kind of want to see how it turns out," like that has a little bit of finality and a little bit of it makes sense. It makes sense by the end of the film, whereas it wouldn't make sense at the beginning of the film.
Okay, so my main quote, and there's a few, but the one that stuck out to me both times that I saw the film was, "You cannot capture a man's entire life in 2 hours. All you can hope is to leave the impression of one." It pretty much sums up screenwriting right there. You cannot put 2 hours worth of a guy's life on film. All you can do is leave an impression of it. And I think that's what happens in Citizen Kane. I think that's what happens in Fincher films. And I think that's what happens in Mank. We don't know everything about Mank. We don't know why she stays with him. We just have an impression about why she stays with him, or why he stays with her, or why anybody puts up with him, or anything that he does.
Yeah.
He's infinitely likable, even as a drunk. So, I mean, sometimes alcoholics, you go, gosh, I get why people give up on him. This guy's pretty cool. He's pretty suave. I liked him a lot as a human being. And I just think that that's a really great line. And I'm hoping that was in the original script, and I'm hoping that's something that his father wrote, because it's a very profound statement also. You cannot, just like I was saying, you can't tell what's going on in somebody's relationship. You just can't. It's only between those two people. So if you're going into a movie to figure out, did JFK really get shot by one shooter or 2 shooters or whatever, or you're going to know something about Tommy Lee Jones more than you would have known about Kevin Costner, you're not. It's 2.5 or however long that film is, 3 hours. Yeah. It's an impression of what the director has interpreted of what happened in life. And I think that people get like freaked out by movies where that didn't happen in real life and nobody does that, only in the movies. It's like, yeah, it's a movie. You're taking 2 hours and you're putting 55 years in it. Impossible. So I love that quote. The second time I watched the film, I thought, I'm going to spend the whole movie just writing down quotes, because there's so many profound things, but also funny. I love the fact that Jack Fincher was able to bring levity to the script through these quotes. And they might seem insignificant to most people, but to me, they really showed me something. When Mank first meets Marion Davies, Amanda Seyfried, there are so many lines in that one scene that are great. When she's on
a pyre.
She's on top. Yeah, she's on a pyre. And, it's just one piece of log stacked on top, and they're trying to burn her at the stake. And he says, "What's at stake here?" To me, I think that's hilarious.
Yeah.
I think it's so funny. And the other thing about when she describes that she's from Brooklyn, and he says something about your flat bush is showing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was good.
What a great way to get it in there with being funny and clever, without being sexist and crude.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It was funny, and she thought it was funny, and she does this little ooh bashful thing. I can't say enough about her, by the way, and I will not stop talking about her. The only other thing in that same scene, when he meets Mayer and who's the other guy?
Thalberg.
It is Thalberg, yeah. And Mayer goes, "Who is that?" And Thalberg goes, "Just a writer." It's hilarious that the script is so important in Citizen Kane and so important in Mank, and they just make him like, he's just a writer. Yeah. And as Mank is walking away, he says, "Any more notes from the oversight tent?" And to me, that's hilarious, because those two guys are sitting there watching this production for no reason whatsoever.
Just to be support. Yeah.
And traditionally, that is the oversight. That is the tent where everybody who's worried about money and time and actresses and actors, they are the oversight tent. So for him to actually point at them and call them what they are, I cracked up. The first time I saw it, I put it on pause because I was laughing so hard. I don't know why, it just tickled me. It just did.
In that same scene, the kind of like this is not as funny, but it's a little bit more biting. But when he goes up to give her a cigarette, he offers her a light, and he says, "Any last words?" because he's about to light her cigarette, and she says, "Welcome to San Simeon." And I was like, oh, that is a little like last words. Like, that's the last thing you'll ever see is this place. And that may be what she's feeling at that point, because she's there and she's been there and she feels like she'll be there forever. So I thought that was a little too true.
Brilliant. It's so layered. You're right. The onion is the best metaphor in the world. And then I think it's his brother who says, well, first of all, the brother says something at some point, "I'm here to protect the secondary characters or promote the secondary characters." I didn't write that quote down, but I thought that's brilliant, because he is a secondary character. So great. It's meta and sur la nez, right on the nose. It's right there. But the other line, I think that the brother says this too. He says, "A play is never a disaster till the movies say it is." When he's trying to get Mank to give over his first play to him. Yeah, it's never a disaster until a movie says it is. That to me is so poignant, being from the theater and all that stuff. It's crazy how many lines that we could go on. It could be one movie podcast about the quotes from this movie.
In the same scene that he talks about being a secondary character, being there for the secondary characters, he also says, "Why did you write this?" And Mank says, "For posterity." And then Joseph says, "Posterity my ass." And then Mank says, "From the original Latin," kind of referencing posterity and posterior. And you're just like, oh my gosh, that's so good. And it's two guys that they get paid exorbitant amounts of money to make words. And it's these two guys kind of going back and forth. And that's just, it makes you want to be in the same room as this guy, because he can think that quickly on his feet and be funny and incisive and cutting and biting.
Which backfires at one point in the beginning of the film when Lily Collins' character gets that letter.
Yes.
And he goes, "Always the smartest guy in the room."
That's
always
the quote.
The smartest guy in the room.
That's the quote.
So good.
And I don't know if you noticed, I'm sure you noticed, but right after that, it cuts to her coming back, and he's broken into the liquor, what he thinks is the liquor, but he's broken into the liquor. So he understands and realizes what he's done. And he doesn't have the filter. He doesn't have the ability to stop himself. He's always going to say what he thinks is the right thing, what he thinks is the most incisive thing, and what he thinks that other people are going to like him for. And it backfires. And I don't know how many times it's done it to him, but this is the most recent one. Yeah.
Just because you're the smartest guy in the room doesn't mean you should open your mouth about facts about somebody's husband on a boat that's probably dead.
Yeah.
And he doesn't think his intellect spoke first, not his heart. The fact that he has a heart and realizes he messed up is what makes it a well-rounded character. Okay, so let's move on to the directing.
Well, strap in, because we got all kinds of stuff. I think that we can kind of get into the technical side of the film, because really the director, especially I think in David Fincher films, the director is the guiding force in all of these visual and oral aspects of the film. And he's pretty much just trying to get people to stand in the right place and say the right lines in the best way possible so that he can put it all together afterwards. And he's chosen people. He's got the same editor who'd won 2 Academy Awards with him in the past. Kirk Baxter is his editor. He's got a new cinematographer, Eric Messerschmidt. It's the first time that he's worked on a film with David Fincher, but he shot all of Mindhunter, which, have you seen Mindhunter?
Yes, the show about the FBI
Yes.
serial killer.
Serial killer profilers, yes. He shot all of David Fincher's episodes of that, and he may have shot the whole series of that. But yeah, so his costume designer, obviously he's got Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor back for the score. So he's got his cast of characters, much like the Mercury Productions company that Orson Welles had. So he's put all these things in place to help him to make this film the best way possible, I think.
I get what you're doing. You're saying that David Fincher is a tent pole, and underneath all of this tent, he has developed relationships with these professionals, and they brought all of these aspects. But let's just stick with David Fincher for just a couple of seconds, because my first statement is, what can you say? What can you say about David Fincher, about this movie? Really, there are no words. I think, and I'm going to say it, I think this is going to be considered Fincher's masterpiece. I think it is a masterpiece. And I think that regardless of how people feel about it now, just like Citizen Kane did well, but wasn't considered the best movie of all time in 1941. It just wasn't.
It also had limited showing capabilities because there were a lot of theaters that wouldn't show it because of William Randolph Hearst.
Because, yeah, that makes sense. So I think that in time, it cannot be understated how incredible this film is. And of course, that's Fincher. So I don't know anything about directing. I don't know what he does on a regular basis. I've seen things on DVDs about how he talks about it and stuff like that. I still don't understand the language, but I will say this. There are things that stuck out in my head the very first time I saw the film, that the second time I saw the film, I was like, yeah, that is really well done. Well, first of all, what I wanted to talk about was where he chose to imitate Citizen Kane in the fading in and fading out of scenes. There are points where, like, the main character still stays lit as the backdrop kind of fades away to black. And then at the very last moment, the main character in the shot, there's a shot of Mank at the birthday party that's very Citizen Kane-esque. But what Fincher decided to do was everything else that he wasn't trying to imitate still fell into the same kind of fading out to black. And it's almost awkward how those things fade out. It's almost like they fade out, but they're still there. You can still see it just a little bit, and then it blinks out really quick. And I thought, he's not only imitating Citizen Kane, but he's utilizing the same techniques that Orson Welles did. I don't know if it's the same techniques, but he's imitating the same things that Orson Welles did, but he's made them his own. That opening shot of the cars going down the road, the dusty, I guess, desert road, is amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know what's computer graphics. I don't know what's generated by a computer. I don't know if it's all real, but and that's why I think you went right to underneath the tent pole into cinematography and lighting and all that other stuff, because that has a lot to do with that. But that's Fincher making choices. He made those choices. This is how I want it to look. And it is amazing. That opening sequence is brilliant, along with Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor's score in the very beginning, which is amazing too. So the other thing is that there are 2 shots I wanted to talk about. The shot with Mank, when you first see Hearst, and he's on that kind of like train set.
It's a dolly, yeah. It's a truck on a track.
Right. And Mank is walking next to it, and Mank is completely on one side of the film, and the train is, well, whatever that thing is, the train is on the other side, but it's completely balanced. But one is kind of like squared. The train is kind of square and kind of cuts off the center of the film, and Mank stays to the left. And as you're moving towards the audience, the whole camera goes backwards as he's following the two in that conversation. And for whatever reason, I think anybody else handling that, you would have gotten dizzy and it would have been off-centered and it would have been awkward. But for whatever reason, it's like, you know how the camera could move away at the same time with that long hallway shot you see in horror films all the time?
It's a dolly zoom, yeah. It's like in Jaws where they zoom in on Roy Scheider's face. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But he does that in not close-ups. It's 2 people in a scene and a big train-like compartment thing moving at the same time. And I just thought the balance of that is beautiful. There's also a shot at Hearst's birthday party where you see Hearst in his chair in front of the fireplace, and my eye goes right to it. I can tell there's a bigger side on the left and right. If it's not equal, my eye will pick it up, and it's completely equal. And there are two columns that are holding up the mantle of the fireplace that are on both left and right side of Hearst, and they're equally square in the frame. And that's Fincher.
Yeah.
That shot right there, it makes me happy. It puts me at ease because you see everything you're supposed to see. It's not too much on the left, not too much on the right. I know I don't have the technical words to describe this, but it was beautiful to look at. It was absolutely gorgeous to look at.
Yeah, that fireplace is very Xanadu-esque. So I think that that's kind of what he was going for, is like there's some sort of like transmission of a huge fireplace in the background in Hearst's castle versus in what was represented in Xanadu. And that same scene you're talking about where you have Hearst at the main table, there's definitely multiple scenes, and there's specifically one scene where you have Hearst in the background and Mank in the foreground. His face in profile is in the foreground, and his face is in focus, and Hearst is in focus. And that is exactly what Greg Toland did in the making of Citizen Kane, having people in the foreground, in the very extreme foreground, and then somebody like Orson Welles as Charles Foster Kane in the far background, but all being in focus, having that very deep depth of field, and having everything be completely in focus no matter where the character goes, and the character can move around in the scene and never lose focus. So that, I think, is definitely an homage to Orson Welles, to how Citizen Kane was shot. Also, in talking about that dolly shot, what I noticed in that scene was that the camera was attached to the dolly or to the truck itself. So the camera was affixed to the truck, so it was moving at exactly the same rate as the truck was. And the only thing that was decoupled from the frame was Mankiewicz. So he was out of place in that scene. Whether it was purposeful or subtext or whatever, he's still the only thing that's not locked to that camera or not locked to our view. And so he's the thing that is different. And then obviously it still keeps moving when he peels off. So he kind of breaks from that frame, that organized frame. And so we get to see that as an audience. And that's a lot of like subtextual stuff that we're getting that I think Fincher's feeding us. And so I think those are awesome shots. Another shot that was an homage to the Citizen Kane shot was when he gets into those bottles of liquor, and you see the bottle fall out of his hand and hit the ground. It's very similar to the shot at the very beginning of Citizen Kane where the snow globe falls out of his hand and shatters onto the ground. And then also like what you were talking about with the scenes where the background lighting fades out and then the foreground lighting fades out. Yeah, I noticed that too. It's so cool. And I just love that stuff. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you may not notice it. And we don't see that kind of lighting changes, those kind of fade outs. But even in a normal transition from a scene, there were a lot of like crossfades. We don't see a lot of crossfades anymore where you take the video from the previous scene and the video from the subsequent scene and they actually fade in together. Some weird stuff can happen when you do that. And there's all kinds of stuff that you would see that was a normal transition in black and white films. But nowadays we don't see that. It's mainly cuts only, just cut. That's what we see in normal films nowadays. Every once in a while you get a wipe. Definitely in a Star Wars movie, you'll get a crazy cool wipe or an iris in or something like that. You know, we're used to that, those more stylized transitions in a fantasy movie or something like that. But in most movies nowadays, we're not used to those things. So seeing it in a film, in a contemporary film, it may be like, whoa, this is a little weird. But comparing it to older films, it totally fits in. So yeah, I loved those choices. And that beginning scene, that first scene, they do a lot in that scene. There's so much in that scene. So when you look at composition of a frame, so you have just a cloudy sky and that's all you see. But what's cutting through that cloudy sky is telegraph wires or telephone wires. And it's just two wires. And you notice them. They're small, but you notice them. And you kind of do see the clouds move a little bit. But that is an interesting backdrop for a classical credit sequence for an older film. And that's obviously what David Fincher is going for in this movie is he's paying homage, but he wants to replicate older films. Could this film have come out in 1940? Let's see if we can make this happen. So he does a couple things there. He does have kind of like a somewhat uniform or bland background. And when he puts up the credits, and I don't know if you noticed this too, but I noticed it the second time I watched it. When he puts up the credits, he starts off with the main credits fading in, but then he scrolls the credits. And when the credits scroll, you should take a look at this. It's so cool. Oh my gosh, I loved it when I saw it the second time. There are little black flecks that are in the negative space between the words. So they scroll, these little black specks scroll at the same rate as the words scroll, which means that they were trying to replicate how optically titles would have actually been created. Because what they would do is they would play back the film and then they would have a transparency. It's like when you were in school and you had like the overhead projector and somebody had to rotate the little thing and you drew on it and then it was full and you rotated it to get to another. So it's essentially rotating this kind of like clear plastic and you're writing or somebody painted on each of these words and they're rotating that up. So I'm sure they did it in a computer, but they were replicating the artifacts associated with how they used to do optical printing of titles. And it's that kind of attention to detail that it's inspiring, actually. It's amazing.
Well, you know, when I flipped my lid is when I realized he put the cigarette burns into the film.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's crazy. Do you want to explain what cigarette burns are?
Well, yeah, we talked about them a little bit in our Fight Club podcast earlier this year, but the cigarette burns are technically considered cue marks. So they're in the top right-hand corner of the screen, and it's a little burn in the film, and it happens about every 20 minutes, and it's an indication at the end of a reel, because a reel of film was only about 20 minutes long, could only be about 20 minutes long. Just physically, older projectors could only handle a certain amount of film. So that it was equivalent to about 20 minutes of film. So close to the end of that reel, about 8 seconds before the end of the reel, there would be a mark on the top right-hand corner that some people would call cigarette burns. Other people call them just a cue mark. And that 8-second mark is called a motor cue. And that's supposed to be when you turn on the projector's motor, the other projector's motor that has the next reel of film. And then 1 second before the end of the reel is the changeover cue. And that is pretty much like saying like, okay, buddy, you got to switch it now. And so you would turn off one projector and turn on the other projector. And then that would put the next reel of film on screen. And so he recreated that on this film every 20 minutes. And in fact, the first one that they did, I noticed that Steph and I were watching it. And the first one that they did, they not only did they do that, but when they did the reel changeover, they actually had a vertical shift in the picture to where it racked back into frame, and then there was a pop in the soundtrack. So, and the reason why there was a pop in the soundtrack is that you have an optical track next to the picture, and so that optical track, when you would have a changeover, the speakers would see a portion of that optical track that didn't have any audio information, so it would give you kind of like a pop. So there's no reason to have that. We're watching this on Netflix. I mean, it's like on a TV. It's being streamed to your house through the internet. But he still put it in there because that's what it would have been like in 1940.
No, there's every reason to put it in there because there's some 14-year-old kid like me watching this on Netflix going, what is that? And then I go down a rabbit hole of trying to figure out what that is. And that will lead me to Citizen Kane. That will lead me to things in the 1950s and the 60s and the 70s. And I also think it's kind of an ode to Fight Club because that's what Brad Pitt does for a living in it, or one of his jobs. And in the industry, we call these cigarette burns. And so it just thrilled me because it was something that was part of the movie going experience up until what, 20 years ago?
Less than that. Well, yeah, going along with the credits, one thing I noticed, which was really cool, another little Easter egg, was that when they brought up the cinematographer's name, Eric Messerschmidt, they said shot in high dynamic range. And they have a special high dynamic range, and they spell high HI instead of HIGH, but high dynamic range logo, which looks very similar to like in the older films. Cause like I just watched a couple, just recently just watched The Awful Truth and a couple other on Criterion Collection. They've got a bunch of Cary Grant movies, so I'm going through some of those. But the credits in those, they'll have these little logos in there. It's like recorded with Western Electric microphones, and they have very specific logos that have Western Electric on them, or recorded in CinemaScope, and there's very specific logos. So they essentially created their own logo that says high dynamic range, which is that's so cool. They're telling you that it is recorded in high dynamic range, which is a very new technology that's only been really utilized in film for the last 7-8 years. And so you can now see movies in high dynamic range or HDR at home on your TV. And so they're just letting you know that it's available in that way, but they're doing it in a kind of like a retroactive way. And so I thought that was really cool. That was another thing that I think that allowed them, that high dynamic range specifically. I was able to watch it on a TV that, I've got a decent TV that's like an LED TV, and I'm watching it in ultra high definition or 4K with high dynamic range. And there's a lot of things that I really noticed in watching it in that you can see that they're able to light certain scenes without extra lighting, without a bunch of lights. They're able to use available lighting, whether it's lights from the windows or even subtle things like if you've got a light bulb on screen, specifically when he's laying in bed at the beginning of the film in Victorville in the ranch, and there's a light bulb in the frame, but it's got kind of like a sconce around it or like a glass covering over it that has a ornate design. Normally in a film, when you would see a light like that in frame, that light would just pretty much blow out any kind of like detail that would be on that of a design on the light covering. But you can see very intricate details in that light covering. And we've talked about in the past how light fall off is so gradual. It's very difficult to get that to look good in streaming movies. But the Irving Thalberg funeral scene where there's a bunch of light coming from these upper windows and it's coming down on the casket, like that light just it's beautiful. I mean, it's amazing. And there's a lot of extreme lighting choices that were made, but I think they were consistent with how films would have been made back in the 1930s and 1940s. And I felt like I was able to see more of what was on screen, but I didn't feel like it was out of place as far as how the film looked. The film looked like it could have been a really good digital transfer of the Philadelphia Story, or a movie that I would have seen, that would have been able to be seen in the theaters in the 1930s and 1940s. And I can do a little bit more of a deep dive on that real quick because of the camera. So it was recorded in 8K. So I know you're like freaked out about HD, and like you talk about this all the time. Like, I don't know how actors handle being seen in HD, let alone 4K. Well, this movie was shot in 8K. So it's 4 times more pixels than 4K, which is 16 times more pixels than HD. So it was also shot on a very specific special camera that was made, the image sensor was made for this film. It was a monochromatic 8K sensor called the Monstrochrome by Red. They make a bunch of high definition and 4K cameras. But the cool part about this is that, number one, there is no color version of this film that exists. You can shoot a movie in color and then remove all of the chroma information and then just display it in black and white. Anybody can do that. I mean, just if you've got a computer, you can, download some software and take any kind of color footage and turn it into black and white, no big deal. But this movie was not shot in color and then the color information was removed. This movie was shot in black and white, and it was shot with a special camera that didn't even record the color information. And because it didn't record the color information, it got more luminance information. It was able to differentiate between the brighter parts of the scene and the darker parts of the scene, and have more degrees of difference between the brighter and darker parts of the scene. So they have a lot more latitude as far as like, if they want to make a whole frame or a portion of the frame brighter or darker, they have that latitude. So they had much more facility with the picture. And I'm sure that David Fincher loved that because he could tweak as much as he wanted to.
Well, let me make a little small clarification. It's not my own vanity, that I dislike 4K in, I'm cool with the way I look. I mean, I have a lot of flaws, and I'm sure they'd show up definitely in 4K. That's not my point. My point is it's distracting to me
Oh,
sometimes.
okay.
Yeah, I know that sounded like a vanity thing, and most people who know me would believe it was a personal vanity thing. But I know how I look. I'm not stupid. And I've seen myself in HD photographs, and I've seen myself on video. I'm very well aware that when I'm 80, I'll be much more accessible on camera than I am now. That said, it's distracting to me to see Robert De Niro's pores on his nose when I'm watching a movie. It's just something that took me a while to get used to. I love everything about HD, everything, and now what is called 8K. I love everything about how things look other than human beings. You ever read Gulliver's Travels?
No.
There's a scene where he shrinks down. Of course, he gets bigger and he shrinks down at one point. And he thinks that him exploring this woman's body is going to be like this great thing because he's tiny and she's huge. And of course, he goes right for her chest and he sees pimples and hairs and follicles and just things about human beings up close that you should not be. And it's completely off-putting. That's how I feel about 4K. I love sports in 4K. I love any kind of history, any kind of environmental, like the Nova channel in HD. I love, and like Christmas in Germany, that guy who does the PBS special, I can't think of his name. All of that in HD is great. As soon as somebody starts talking and I can see like the small little spittle on the side of their lip, that's very human. And it's also probably left in there because that is very human. It's just distracting to my eye. I've gotten used to it. And I am sorry if anybody does ever get to see me in HD.
Well, no,
that's the personal vanity.
But that's why it's good that we have David Fincher looking at spittle on the sides of corners of mouths and being like, well, we're not going to make that. We're not going to do that take. So he wouldn't allow something like that. So we're in good hands.
Oh my God. God praise him. And it's interesting that when we're talking about lighting and cinematography, you pulled out the same things that I thought of when I wanted to talk about this category, because you know way more about this kind of stuff than me. But the windows in the funeral, that's an actual shot from Citizen Kane too. That's in, I think, the retirement home. Don't quote me on this because I didn't get a chance to watch Citizen Kane again. I'm kind of glad I didn't, but I also wanted to see it. But that's a shot from Citizen Kane, no doubt about it. But it's beautiful looking. And the desert in general, from their view of his villa, is gorgeous in this film. It just is so textured.
I think also what they did is they were able to utilize, I saw a few behind the scenes pictures, they were able to utilize the same technology that The Mandalorian uses. It's an array of LEDs. It's essentially just an LED wall. And I don't know if they used specifically a volume like what The Mandalorian uses, but they were replicating rear projection. And there's a scene close to the beginning of the movie where he's in a car with a guy and that they get into a wreck. And you can tell it's kind of like what they would consider a process shot, where they're in the foreground and then the background in the old days would be a rear projection of going down the street, going down the road. And you've seen it a million times and you're kind of used to it. And there's people on the sides, they're kind of shaking the car to make it look like it's driving, but they're not going anywhere. And in this movie, it did look really good because you were able to have something that was behind them and something that's potentially over them and to the side of them that is not only doing what a rear projection would do, which is showing in camera what's behind them or what's beside them, but it's also illuminating them. It's emitting light onto them. And so they're getting the same illumination that they would get if they were outside. And I think that they did that for multiple scenes. There were certain scenes that I kind of may have been able to determine. There were some scenes where Rita, who we haven't really talked about, but she's amazing, played by Lily Collins, and Mank are sitting there looking out into the desert and into the road at some cars coming up. And I think they were looking into this LED wall, which, like I said, looks great. And there are a couple other scenes that I was able to maybe pick out a little bit where, the scene with Marion Davies, when they go on a picnic, Marion Davies is close to the end of the film. Marion Davies and Mank go on a picnic and they're kind of like going back and forth. And she's saying like, do you really want to release this film? And he's like, well, I don't know. And then there's that great back and forth, those lines of like, if this film does come out, would you be able to forgive me? And she's like, if this film doesn't come out, would you forgive me? So that scene actually looked like it was shot in front of those LED walls. Although they did have little like flies and stuff flying around them and stuff. But yeah, I could kind of notice it a little bit, but it still looked really, really good. And I'm sure that it was much better than if they were to actually do rear projection or, God forbid, green screen. It seems like green screen is going away now. There's going to be less and less green screen.
Yeah, but don't you think that's kind of like the modern day version of rear projection?
Yeah.
Is these LED screens?
Oh yeah, and I think it's so much better than green screen. So like with rear projection, you still have to deal with lighting, and with green screen, you have to deal with multiple things. I mean, even in television, in the industry that I work in, we deal with green screen, and you can't have too much light shining on the green screen, because when that light reflects off the green screen and onto your talent, then it imparts a green hue to that person, and you can't really get that out of them very easily. So it's a really fine balance of getting the right amount of light on the green screen, not too much light, but enough light so that you can remove all of that green and put in your graphics, whatever you want to put behind them. But the other problem with doing it that way is that you have to exactly recreate the lighting that would be, if you're doing, all Avengers Endgame was all green screen, right? Like they had green screen all behind them, and there's a bunch of people just in a parking lot in Atlanta. That was it. And so, but what they had to do is, if there's a sun at a particular point in the sky, they had to have a light that was shining on all of the actors at that exact angle, no matter like where they were. They had to rotate that light along with where the people were. So they had to be very specific about where that lighting was. But when you see back behind the scenes of the shooting of The Mandalorian, they don't have to do any of that because they've got lights all around them. They've got the screens around them that are generating the background, but they're also shining light on the characters, and they're able to make things a lot easier by doing that, and it looks more realistic. The Mandalorian looks really good, and they have to do a lot less. They have to do barely any post-production on The Mandalorian. They have to do a lot of getting ready for it before they shoot. So they've just kind of moved all the work from the end of the process to the beginning of the process, but it allows them to be a lot more facile with, oh, you want to move this mountain over here? Great, no problem. Oh, you want the sun to go down a little bit more? Fine. It's not a big deal. But when you shoot on green screen, or even with rear projection, it's kind of what it is what you get, and you just got to deal with it afterwards. So I think that Fincher's utilizing the new technology that's available to him, and he's not stepping out too far, but he's using it for what he needs to use it for, and I think it works really well.
All right, so let's move on. What kind of emotional impact did this film have on you?
I'm too busy dissecting the film. There's no emotion that happens with Fincher films. The first 10 times I watch it, I don't know. No, that's not true. That's not true. I did, the second time I did understand a lot more. I was able to understand character relationships. But as far as emotional impact, I've never cried in a David Fincher movie, and I may never cry in a David Fincher movie. And I don't think those are the movies that he makes.
Nah, Benjamin Buttons. Benjamin Buttons is
okay.
It's got an emotional sequence at the end when she sees him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's interesting that you said that, because my first thought was, well, I think people would say to me, well, did you cry during Mank? It doesn't have any emotional resonance. Well, I didn't cry at Citizen Kane, not once. Doesn't make it any less profound. It doesn't need a big cry scene, a big yelling and screaming Mr. Smith goes to Washington monologue. I don't need all of that. I need good storytelling, and that is profound to me. Back to the original screenplay, the character development in this film is rich. Each character has something that you know about them. You don't normally learn about the physical therapist, which is Monica Grossman, Fraulein Frida, when she's telling the story about what Mank does for her village or did for her village in Germany. That choked me up the second time I saw it. And it's because it's handled so well by that actress. And you learn so much about her by when she says he likes to drink. He's a grown man. He's a good man. Let's give it to him. It's powerful. It choking me up thinking about it now. So did I cry during Citizen Kane? Doesn't matter. Still think it's probably the best movie out there. And that can be debated, but it really is great. And I didn't cry during Mank, but it is going to be one of my favorite movies. If not, well, I love the Five Bloods. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. It doesn't have to have an emotional sequence in order for me to be emotionally connected to it. Just the frustrations as an artist, or the frustrations of having an addiction, or having a partner who only understands you and the rest of the world doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to quip little things underneath your mouth at a party that you can't see out loud that somebody else understands. That's an emotional connection that I need. I love how you said David Fincher. I've never cried at a David Fincher film.
But
You heartless son of a
you
gun.
You do have me thinking. Actually, there is a part, and we need to get into spoilers, because I think that this is something, if you haven't seen the film, I think it's something that really does hit you at a particular point in the film, close to the end of the film. So spoilers from now on for Mank. There's the duality of the scene at the end. This is the scene that I'm sure people will talk about, any kind of scene that will be played during the Oscars, where Mank comes into a dinner scene at Hearst's San Simeon dining room, and he does his Don Quixote monologue. And that's given a lot of screen time and a lot of style. I didn't realize until the second time I watched the film is that much more emphasis to Herman Mankiewicz, the character, is the next scene. Well, the next scene chronologically, but not the next scene in the film. But the next scene, which is Hearst walking him out of the house, where Hearst also has a story to tell him. And it's about the organ grinder's monkey. And that has much more impact on Mank than anything that he has said, or in any reaction that he got from anybody. And I didn't realize how powerful that was, that he didn't know his place, quote unquote place, in this relationship. And you could say that the rest of the film, or the impetus for him writing Citizen Kane, could have come from him being put in his place at that point. So that was probably the biggest nugget of emotion that I got. And anytime when he interacts with Sarah, though, those are emotionally charged moments, but they're subtle. And there's so much depth to it, but we may not be seeing it. I think by the end of the film, you do see a lot of the depth between him and Sarah, especially since they don't interact as much. They have like 3 scenes together. So, yeah.
Side note really quick, and then we'll move on. I love the fact that Hearst is not made out to be the bad guy in this film. He's actually quite charming, and he's very simple in a way, and very sophisticated. And that scene that you're talking about, where he walks him out, whatever, the back way, if you will, is handled so well. And once again, it goes back to the screenplay. It's not condescending. He's not trying to put Mank in his place. He's simply very politely, like a gentleman would do, escorting this guy off of his premises, because this guy he's gone way over the line. And I thought that it was nice to see somebody who thought for sure was going to be the antagonistic person in this film is not. And it's good to see that it's a well-rounded version of this character that you've heard so much about, and already have an opinion about if you've done any kind of research about this subject whatsoever, or know any part of that history. And it's almost hard to not know his name when it comes to publications and newspapers and films and all that other stuff. It's hard to not know, because people even reference his name nowadays. So I thought it was great that I was emotionally connected to a film that a character I should have disliked, but I actually was empathetic to. And I think that's profound.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to acting.
Kind of buried the lead, man. I'm surprised that it's been an hour and 15 minutes and we're now getting to acting.
Well, I also think that it's also fair that you are all about certain subjects when it comes to films, and I'm all about the acting. So why should you not take center stage when it comes to somebody who is so technically precise as David Fincher? It makes sense we talked about all those other things first. And I think I prioritized the categories in the fact that, isn't the screenplay more important on some level than most of anything else that we've talked to? Isn't the lighting and cinematography and directing even more important than most things in this film? Aren't they? If you break it down, they are. That said, the acting is superb. Gary Oldman will be nominated for the Oscar. He deserves to be nominated for the Oscar, and he does these great things. When we were talking about when he was walking out of the room at one point, he throws away that little line. There's also a moment, I think it's Mayer who says, right hard, aim low. I can't remember who says it, but Mankiewicz does this. He does this laugh that's almost a sub-vocal noise. It's just well done. Look for that line and listen for Gary Oldman's reaction. I think his tone and cadence sound different than most Gary Oldman characters. You can tell it's him. By the way, I didn't reveal this yet, but I actually watched the film a couple of days ago and then listened to it on headsets last night as if it was a soundtrack. I got about an hour in, which is very interesting. The only thing you couldn't, because Manx was a playwright and Orson Welles was a theater person and also a radio play guy, so I wanted to see if this would play as a radio production. And it does, except for the transitions. I know where the flashbacks were, and then the typing, which is also brilliant, by the way. Yeah, because it also allows a person to understand, once again, the screenplay is important and what is in a screenplay. Exterior shot, daytime, clock on wall. You have that in a screenplay, and that is also something that people don't understand. People mostly think it's dialogue, but actually how a scene is set up is also in the screenplay as well. So other than that, listening to it, you could pretty much follow everything. It was a little hard when it was jumping around in time, but I had already seen it, so I could pay attention to it. But Gary Oldman's voice, go and listen to just his voice. It doesn't sound like anything else he's ever done. It's highly impressive. And just like Orson Welles was nominated for Citizen Kane, Gary Oldman will be nominated for Mank. Will he win? More than likely not. There are so many performances out there. If he did win, I'd be ecstatic because it would be a performance where you don't have that emotionally Mr. Smith Goes to Washington monologue scene, but there are all these little things that he does that are so impressive. When Lily Collins, Rita Alexander, his assistant, answers the phone and goes, it's poor, and almost calls his wife poor Sarah. And the way Gary Oldman looks at her like, really? And of course the wife is like, I heard that.
Yep.
And it lends to a great moment later on where she was like, okay, a couple of things. I don't want to be called poor Sarah anymore. So that's brilliant screenwriting that gets called back. But there are so many things that I don't understand Gary Oldman's level of acting. It's just up there.
I think one example of his facility with acting is that in a particular scene we alluded to it a little bit earlier, but in a particular scene with Rita where she gets a note from her husband and she is reading it and he's like, any information from the lieutenant? And he's doing this foppish British accent, but it's like an American, New Yorker American doing a foppish British accent. But he's a British actor doing a New Yorker American accent, doing a foppish British accent. It's just like, it's not him speaking in his native tongue and his native accent. It's him making these subtle changes to try to like heighten the comedy. And that's another level. Like that's really cool. And it's noticeable, but in a good way. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that he's 62 years old. Like, I guess when he shot it was about a year ago when they shot it, but he's 61 years old. He's playing someone who's anywhere from 33 years old to 40-something years old. And obviously, this guy smoked way too many cigarettes and he's drank way too much booze. So a 30-year-old who's gone through all of that, I'm sure looks a little bit different than Gary Oldman, who's, I'm sure, taking care of himself for a 62-year-old. So I know that he had the ability to play that, but I think that it was still believable. Would you think, from a casting standpoint, would he be your like number one guy for this? I don't know, but I think that when they asked David Fincher about it, he's like,
it's Gary Oldman.
He's like, if you can get Gary Oldman, you get Gary Oldman. Like that was his. Yeah, that was his rationale. It's like, how old is he? I don't care. He's Gary Oldman.
Well, also, it doesn't. You brought this up with Wilford Brimley when he was in Cocoon. He was 50-something years old in Cocoon. That's my age. Yeah, that's crazy. And I fact checked that, by the way, because I was like, no way was he 5 years younger than me making that movie. He looks like a grandfather in that film. I'm wondering how he probably didn't care because he was getting work. It's the same thing. People aged differently back then, along with all of the trappings that you mentioned: smoking, drinking, gambling, whatever. Money, not money, 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 not money, 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 money. The tense artistic process of writing a screenplay, the tense artistic process of dealing with somebody like Orson Welles, or the screenwriters for Wizard of Oz, which he makes mention of in the beginning of the film. It never once dawned on me that he's 60 something years old and he's playing a 30-year-old. It didn't bother me for a split second, not a split second.
That's good.
First of all, in Elizabethan times, Romeo and Juliet were like 13 and 14, and they were in the prime of their life. And then, they had kids and they were dead by 25. So 30 and 60 nowadays, two entirely different things. So he's amazing. I hope he wins some other kind of accolade. Like I said, if he wins the Oscar, hey, I can't complain about that. He's not personally who has lit me up the most this year, but the bar is super high with him. So it's like, it's almost impossible to talk about him because he just has an ability to disappear, but always be there at the same time. It's a phenomenon that most actors don't have.
And as an example, we haven't said Gary Oldman one time until just now, until us talking about him. So every time,
that's a good
every
point.
time we talked about him, we just said Mank or Herman Mankiewicz or Herman. So
you got a point.
That says something.
And then I'll wrap up the rest of the acting for me into one giant category. It's super great. All of it. I was talking about the brother. His name is Tom Pelphrey. He was in the 3rd season of Ozark, and he's amazing in that. If you ever get a chance to watch that show and you watch that season, he has a 5-minute monologue in the back of a cab. It's 5 minutes long. I timed it. Okay. He's speaking to the cab driver, but he's really not speaking to the cab driver. It is the best monologue I've ever seen on film to this date. It is amazing. Both my friend and I both predicted him to be nominated for the Emmy, and he was not. So I'm glad that he's working, and I'm glad that he's in a David Fincher film, and I'm glad he's like, I got a little middle finger to you, Emmy, because now I'm in a Fincher film and blah, 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 blah. And Lily Collins, which we've mentioned a couple of times already, she's amazing. All of them. Jamie McShane, who plays Shelley Metcalf, he has an incredible scene.
He does.
Closer to the middle end of the film, and you learn so much about him. And yet again, the screenplay allows you the development of a minor character, but yet he's peppered all the way through the film.
He is.
To the point where I didn't notice it
San
until the
Simeon.
second time that I saw the film. I didn't notice it. So that shot of when they're listening to the political speech from across the road and he comes up from behind Mank, it's one of the best shots in the film. I love that shot. If it was a silent film, you would know that those two men know each other. They have a relationship, and it's an important relationship, regardless of whether or not you see them two on screen again. And I think that has a lot to do with the two actors in the shot. And so to end with, which I've already mentioned, Amanda Seyfried, I've loved her since Big Love. I've always thought she was a standout. But man, when she's on screen, your eye goes right to her. Now, she's a drop-dead gorgeous woman, no doubt.
Yeah.
And she looks great in the period pieces and the wig and the dresses and all that other stuff. But she is a standout. She takes your attention away from Gary Oldman in the scenes that she's in. She is amazing. And I cannot stress enough, the scene at the end, she says nothing. She does not speak a word in that scene. And she is screaming out of her eyes. And you understand every single thing that she's thinking. It's an Academy Award nominatable performance, and she will, without a shadow of a doubt, be nominated. Now, there's a lot of front runners in that category this year, but she will be considered a serious front runner. She is magical in this film. She has some of the goofiest things to do and say, if you want to put it in perspective.
Oh, nerds.
She's in the back of the car at the beginning of the film, and he wants her to go back and tell Mayor something. And she was like, I can't. And he was like, what? Why not? And she's like, well, it's silly because I've already had my exit. That's such an actress thing to say. It's ridiculous. But she pulls it off. And the amount of dialogue that her and Gary Oldman have in that first birthday party scene outside in, I want to call it Shangri-La, but it's not, with the zoo and all of the animals, the amount of dialogue and the back and forth that they have, she is infinitely believable. So I am happy for her that her career has taken her to the point where she's now being considered for an Oscar, because it is a tremendously profound performance. It's subtle in places, which is strange to say because she is playing that Brooklynese-esque person. And she also does the same thing that you were talking about that Gary Oldman does when she does the what's at stake thing. When she's talking, she sounds like she's from Brooklyn. But when she's doing the lines, help, somebody help me, she sounds completely dialect free. Very hard to do. And then to flip right back. She's only got a couple of lines in that dialect free zone, but still she pulls it off. She sounds like a completely different person. Because when the first time I saw it, I was like, where's the girl screaming? And then I realized it was my misunderstanding of where everybody was, that it was her.
Well, I had a couple things with different actors. I wanted to get your take on how you thought Tom Burke did with his portrayal of Orson Welles. And did you feel like there were portions of the film where the Joseph Mankiewicz character, Tom Pelphrey, was like doing a tryout for Orson Welles? His voice was very just Orson Welles-like. And I'm like, what?
But it goes back. I think that's the 1930s, 40s influence.
No, I get that. But certain things that he said, like just his like, so word around the campfire is that you're hunting the great white whale. And it's like, I thought that Orson Welles said that because that was in the trailer. And I thought Orson Welles said that. When I hear him say it in the film, I'm like, okay, I know that's him, but it really sounds like Orson Welles from the time. So I don't know. You're right, though.
They had this very affected, everything sounds like it's from a 1930s, 40s radio play.
Yeah, there's a pattern.
Everything does. Yeah. So I'm right. There is a pattern, and it all has this kind of like, W.C. Fields type dialect to it. And Tom Pelphrey, he falls into that, but I think that that's more a 1930s, 40s dialect, or what we think of when we see a film, and which I thought was an unusual choice, and I'm not 100% convinced it was the best choice, but I think that's a directing choice, not an acting choice. I think that it's written for him to sound like that. There's a tone and cadence more than a actor making a choice that's out of rhythm for the movie, because they all kind of sound like that at some point. With the exception of Mankiewicz, with the Z for whatever reason. I love that.
Coming out of nowhere with the Z.
I love that. I love that. And for some reason, a Z, I love that. So I don't necessarily think it's a problem as much as it is a choice that they made. As for, what's his name, Tom Burke? Once again, I think this is about directing choices more than acting choices. When he's in shadow, or in blurry shots, the whole entire first 45 minutes of the film, you never really see him until later on. That's kind of like not showing the shark in Jaws. Speaking of another Jaws reference in our Mank podcast, you never really see the shark. And that was for practical reasons because they couldn't get the shark to work, but it added to the threat of the villain in Jaws. And I think what Fincher did was found an actor who sounds just like Orson Welles does, looks enough like him, but introduces him slowly, visually, so you can get used to him looking like who he looks like by hearing how much he sounds like Orson Welles, because he sounds just like him. It's unnerving. And like I said, I listened to it last night. And when I was listening to it, I was like, is that really Tom Burke? Or did they do something, because I know who Fincher is, did they do something to kind of interject Orson Welles' real dialogue into this film and make it sound like this actor's giving this performance? Or is it the actor? Apparently it's the actor. And it's confusing because at the end of the film, I thought we were hearing Orson Welles quoted, but it's not. It's Tom Burke doing an Orson Welles quote. And that's amazing to me because I thought for sure it was like they do at the end of What's Love Got to Do with It, or Buddy Holly's story, where you see the real performer at the end. You really hear Orson Welles at the end, but you're not. That's Tom Burke. So I thought he was great. I thought he looked enough like him to fool me, and he certainly sounds enough like him. But once again, I think the screenplay is the important part here. I'm sorry, I'm not bashing on the acting on any level, and I'm not interested in the acting in this film. I am interested, but it is the least thing that finds me wanting to have a conversation about this film. I find the fact that they make Orson Welles the antagonist of the film way more interesting than any acting choice. I didn't know that there was conflict between him and Mank. I didn't know that Mank wrote the screenplay and Orson Welles attached his name to it, and then both of them won Oscars. Yeah. But it's so great because it kind of, and all these people have passed away. So there's a lot of artistic liberties that they're taking. But he did say, Mankiewicz did say what he said at the end.
He said, I'm glad that I got the award in his absence in the same way that I wrote the screenplay in his absence.
Sharp. Yep. What else would you do when you're holding an Oscar? What are they going to like take it away from you? No, you're speaking the truth. Yep. I love truth. Yep. And that's truth. And it's all of his family, all of Mankiewicz's family's probably like, now everybody knows.
Well, in that scene where the RKO president comes up to accept the Oscar for them, because neither one of them were at the Oscars, the person who's giving out the Oscar is Ben Mankiewicz, who is his grandson, and who's also a critic, and he does a lot. If you ever watch TCM, he'll do like intros to movies on TCM. That's him. That's his grandson.
I know that guy.
Yeah.
I like him.
He's cool. So a couple of things. David Fincher, he hired Maurice LaMarche, who's a famous voice actor. He does a lot of animated movies and cartoons and stuff. And he's famous for having a very, very accurate Orson Welles impression. And I don't know if you've ever seen Animaniacs or Pinky and the Brain. Well, he did the voice for the brain, whose voice is patterned on Orson Welles. So what Fincher did was he had Maurice LaMarche read every single line of dialogue in the script and gave it to Tom Burke so that he could listen to it and mimic that. So essentially, they're not doing a recording, but they pretty much gave Tom Burke the blueprint to do what you were talking about. So yeah. You're right on the mark.
Paradise. Absolute paradise. And let me tell you, this is 30 years in the making, this story. I was told when I first started acting that I should never watch a play or a movie of something I'm getting ready to do on stage because I need my own interpretation of it, and I'm going to end up imitating the other person and not creating my own character. And I was like, okay, that's good and well, but if I'm at a loss of what I'm doing and I can't figure out the intention and I can't figure out the motivation and I can't figure out the I want and I can't figure out why I'm on stage and why I'm fighting this other person, if I listen to somebody else do it, it might bring me insight to why and how I should do it. Oh, that's blasphemy. That's against the religion of acting, blah, blah. I got slammed for even considering it. And I'm like, screw you. If I'm going to do the to be or not to be speech and talk Shakespeare, that is not second nature to me. I'm going to listen to Richard Burton, Sir John Gielgud, and everybody else I can listen to because they all taped that speech. And in particular, that speech. Kevin Kline was doing a PBS special at the time, and I listened to that. I don't care what you say. I'm just not going to tell you that's what I did. If it comes through me in the end, it's still me doing it. I'm not doing an imitation of what you've done. I'm being influenced by what you've done, and it's bringing me to a central place that can make it emotionally resonant for me. So, hallelujah. David Fincher rules. I love that he did that. I get why people would have a problem with it, but we're talking a very specific voice, a very specific character. So that's like saying, once again, another What's Love Got to Do with It reference. That's like telling Angela Bassett not to listen to Tina Turner talk because you want to create the character yourself. No, Tina Turner had a very specific cadence and has a very specific cadence. And I think it's smart to listen to how she did it. And the very big Proud Mary speech that she always does before they do that song, we're going to take the song and do it really slow. The way that Tina Turner does it's terrible imitation. Sorry. Actually, if I was revved up, I could actually do a pretty good imitation of that, be honest with you. Shakespeare, no. Tina Turner, yes. In the movie, Angela Bassett does the beginning of that speech, and then it slowly turns into Tina's real voice on the song. And it's quite brilliant because at first I was like, I couldn't tell the difference. So for me, I love the fact that they gave Tom Burke that. If it was an original character and it was something he was developing that wasn't a specific person in real life, I might have a little bit of problem with it. But for me, Fincher does everything I love. I love the fact that he doesn't give you a line reading, but he will flip and flop and cut things to make it the line reading he wants. I love that. I'm sorry, I do. I just do. Because it's so frustrating as an actor to not be able to get to that moment. And you just know that the line is not right. You can hear it in your head. Something's wrong in this moment. Now, I cover myself. I'll do a whole bunch of like sub vocal noises to get in and out. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. There's all these grunts and sneezes and until I can get it out and I get off stage and I'm like, I hate that line and I hate that scene because of that line. So to actually take that out of the equation, I love it.
So, all right. Well, I'd
it.
be remiss if we didn't talk about the score, which is once again, like we talked about, with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, just the headline of Nine Inch Nails frontman does score for Mank. I mean, that's just kind of like, okay. But when I heard that they were going to be working together again, I was fine with it because I knew they were going to figure something out. And the fact that they're using period accurate instrumentation and him and Atticus Ross are able to like move into that space and be able to create new pieces of music, but still have them fit in with the film and not call attention to themselves, but bolster certain scenes. I think getting out of the way in this scenario is the best way of doing it. And I intend to listen to the score separate from the film just to see if there's interesting new things in there, because I think some of the best score writing over the last year and a half has been Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score for Watchmen. It is a masterpiece. And the fact that they did that probably within the same year, the same calendar year as this, is just amazing to me. It just shows you that they are musicians first and foremost, and that as far as their ability to create music to serve a purpose, they are masterful at that. If the purpose is neo-futuristic Watchmen-based music or circa 1930s Hollywood music, they can do it. And that, to me, is amazing. I bow down at their abilities.
I agree 100% because if you had told me that Head Like a Hole writer is the same guy who wrote this big band sounding soundtrack for Mank, I would never have believed it. It sounds like it's a 1930s and 40s film without a shadow of a doubt. There's a few times where they use that Watchmen type music in this film, but it's very briefly, and it's sounds like somebody's just, there's one scene when I can't think of what it was and I forgot to write it down, but there's a scene where they're coming up on Mank. I think it's that scene where she discovers that the bottles have been drunk for the first time, or the one. It sounds like somebody's hitting like a metal trash can. It's very Watchmen. It's very modern sounding, but everything else is period appropriate. And then, like I said, I listened to it last night to hear the soundtrack and the dialogue more than anything else and not watch it. No, I listened to it on my phone or watched it on my phone, and every once in a while I would pick up the phone to look at it because it is a beautiful film to look at and it's hard to like keep my eyes away from it. But did you notice that when the writers came into the movie, and in particular his brother, and he's walking down that hallway, it sounds like typewriters making the soundtrack at that point, and then, which brings me to my last point about sound mixing, is that when you walk into the room and you pass all of the people who are really typing, the music kind of lowers just a little bit and catches up to the rhythm of the real typewriters as they're passing in that room. And then they go into the other room and everything dies down. It's brilliant. Yep. Absolutely brilliant. So let's talk Oscar predictions and we'll get out of here. I have a strange prediction. I think it's going to be nominated for Best Picture, Director, Original Screenplay, Actor, Supporting Actress, Cinematography, Production Design, Costumes, by the way, which is really hard to do in a black and white film because you have to make certain material look a certain way on film. It's amazing. And also kudos to the costume designer, who I don't have him or her name up on my screen.
They've worked together before.
Did you notice that Amanda Seyfried is wearing the band costume, the marching band costume from Citizen Kane in the dinner sequence? Yes. And that's actually when he comes into the editors in Citizen Kane and he opens up the door and all the band, marching band comes
Yes.
through in Citizen Kane. That white costume is the same costume she's wearing in that party
That's
themed
awesome.
scene in
The
Mank.
costume designer is Trish Somerville.
Yes, nominated for an Oscar, definitely in editing. That's 9 Oscars I'm predicting it to be nominated for, and it's going to win 1 original screenplay, which ironically is exactly what happened with Citizen Kane.
Oh my gosh.
And I did not realize that when I thought that prediction until I watched the movie again today. The one Oscar that I think it should not lose is screenplay. And I just don't. I mean, if anybody else on that list wins, they will well deserved. And period pieces win costumes a lot. And it's hard to do a period piece in a black and white film. And I think that's brilliant. And I hope they don't underestimate the cinematography. And I hope they don't underestimate editing, because there's some sequences that are amazing. The sequence when the liquor shows up in Mank's villa and the producer comes in,
John Houseman,
and they're trying to distract him. Yes. And the way that that's edited is brilliant. It's so great because you know exactly everything that's going on in that sequence. So I don't underestimate anything from this film. I'm not saying that anybody who might win shouldn't win. I'm just saying it's poetically just that it will be nominated for this amount of Oscars and only win the one.
Well, so 2 things. I think that it should win editing, at least from the films that I've seen so far this year. I really do think that it should win editing. And one scene that we haven't talked about, but is a perfect example of great editing, is the scene when close to the beginning of the movie, when all the writers get called into David O. Selznick's office. And it's so well done. The camera motion and the intercutting between opposite sides, and how it's so organic. It's an improv game. Like, I'm sure you've done those games in acting class where somebody says something, starts with one premise, the next person moves on to the next one. And I think that works on multiple layers. I think that you could read that scene as like, oh, they spent the last 72 hours writing this, but they didn't. They spent the last 72 hours gambling and looking at the large-chested woman with pasties on who was helping them work, quote unquote, in their office. And they just go in there, and they are literally the smartest men in the room, and they're just trying to trip each other up and get them to put them in a position that they have to get out of. So, but just the fact that they move through this whole scene, and then at the very end of the scene, you see all of the writers in frame, and then they pitch to the new writer, Charlie Letter, and the camera pans over to him like we totally forgot about him, and then the camera reveals him and is like, oh, he's still there, and now it's his turn and he's on the hot seat. So that's a great scene. And then there's one other thing that I have to bring up, and I think is also another, well, I think it actually encompasses a lot of the film, and it's such a subtle thing. It's the first scene at San Simeon when they're all kind of around Hearst and everybody's kind of off in their own corners, and Mank and his wife Sarah are kind of like off to the side, and Mayer's there, Thalberg's there, they're all talking. There's a portion close to the beginning of the scene where the waiter comes in with 2 drinks, 2 kind of martini drinks, and hands both of them to Mank, and Sarah reaches out for her drink, and Mank, instead of giving her one of the 2 drinks, takes one drink and puts it on the counter away from her and keeps the other drink. And she realizes what he's doing, but then kind of like immediately is okay with it. And there's so much going on there. It's in the background. It's not a primary focus. There's other people that are talking. So our brain is focused on what they're saying, but kind of we see in the background this is going on, and it's a character moment between the 2 characters, and it's elucidating his character, and it is also showing us that she's understanding and loving, but still kind of annoyed. I don't know. And it's so subtle. I didn't even notice it the first time. The second time I noticed it. And it's that kind of thing where, like, how many more of those moments have I not seen in this movie? And I've seen it twice.
Right?
Oh, I just can't wait to see it again.
Tuppence Middleton is the actress's name.
She's great.
Who plays Sarah.
She is great.
We haven't said her.
Oh my gosh.
She is great.
Yep.
She is so underplayed and so subtle, but it's all right there. It's all
Mhm.
right there. I love the fact that all of the female supporting characters, finger quotes, are actual, interesting, fully fleshed out
That's the
characters
writing.
for this story. I'm not saying that, yeah, I'm not saying that they're like completely, I mean, the story's not about his physical therapist.
No.
So we need to know only what we need to know from her. But it says so much. It is the writing, but those actresses
Sure.
have found a way to show you more with what might not have been on the
Yeah.
page. And I think his wife does the same thing. Sarah does the same thing. Oh, by the way, let's call David Fincher and have him re-edit everything I mispronounce in the podcast, because that's what he does. I love it.
It'll only take him
So
4 weeks and $4 million. That's all.
Worth it. Worth it. It's just, it takes the burden of making a mistake as an actor sort of off the plate. Not a mistake. Mistakes can be good. A major mistake. And actually, in my opinion, it can guide you. So I like that.
All right. Okay. Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. You can tweet us at actorengineer. And you can find us on YouTube. Just search for Actor and Engineer Podcast. And we'll see you next time.